What if the real war in Europe wasn't just being fought with missiles and tanks, but with invisible weapons designed to confuse, divide, and destabilize entire nations? That might sound like the plot of a thriller, but it's exactly what's happening right now. And the story begins with a plane flying high over the Baltic, suddenly losing its navigation. The passengers had no idea at the time, but what they experienced was one of the clearest signs yet that Europe is under siege, not only by Russia's bombs and soldiers, but by a carefully crafted hybrid war. The incident I'm talking about involved Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission. She was on board when her plane was hit by a GPS jamming attack over the Baltic Sea. Think about that for a moment. The top official of the European Union, responsible for representing 500 million people, suddenly flying blind because of an invisible interference. This wasn't a random glitch, and nobody seriously believes it was an accident. The culprit, according to most experts, was Russia. Now, if you followed the mainstream coverage of this, you probably saw the headlines. They framed it as yet another technical interference, one of many electronic attacks that have become almost routine in the region. Reports noted that GPS jamming has been affecting commercial flights around Finland, Poland, and the Baltic states for months. Aviation authorities downplayed it, reassuring the public that pilots are trained to handle such disruptions. End of story, right? Just another annoyance in the ongoing confrontation with Russia. But here's what they don't tell you. This wasn't just about inconveniencing airlines or making life harder for pilots. It was a warning shot, a deliberate message. Von der Leyen's plane was targeted because she symbolizes the European project itself. If Russia can interfere with her safety in the skies, what else can it do? What else is it willing to do? Almost immediately, a political storm erupted. Boris Pistorius, Germany's defense minister, called for calm. He urged European officials not to jump to conclusions or make irresponsible claims about Russia's involvement without proof. On the surface, that sounds like the voice of reason. After all, governments don't want to escalate tensions unnecessarily, but this cautious rhetoric is exactly what Moscow counts on. By creating just enough doubt, just enough hesitation, Russia can continue pushing its hybrid war without facing unified resistance. And make no mistake, this is war. Not in the traditional sense of tanks rolling across borders, though Russia is doing that in Ukraine, but in the modern sense of hybrid aggression. The Atlantic Council, one of the think tanks that follows this closely, recently published an analysis warning that Russia's hybrid war against Europe is intensifying. The author, Maxim Beznosyuk, explained that Moscow has spent more than a decade perfecting this playbook. From cyber attacks to disinformation campaigns, from covert funding of extremist parties to electronic warfare like GPS jamming, the Kremlin has built a toolkit that allows it to weaken Europe from within without ever officially declaring war. It's worth remembering, many of these tactics were first developed during Russia's earlier campaigns against Ukraine. Back in 2014, when Moscow annexed Crimea, it didn't just send in troops. It also flooded the information space with propaganda, launched cyber attacks on Ukrainian infrastructure, and used electronic warfare to confuse the military. Today, those same tactics are being applied on a continental scale, and Europe, frankly, is struggling to keep up. Why? Because Europe is not a single state, it's a collection of 27 nations, each with its own politics, priorities, and vulnerabilities. Coordination is hard, and Russia knows it. As Beznosyuk points out, this lack of unity is Europe's Achilles heel. Every time one leader urges caution while another calls for action, every time countries disagree on how to respond, Moscow gains breathing space. This raises a critical question. What is Russia really aiming for with these hybrid attacks? The answer is both simple and chilling. It doesn't need to conquer Europe with armies, it just needs to create enough division, enough confusion, and enough fear to make Europe paralyzed. If European nations doubt each other, if they argue more among themselves than they stand together, Russia wins without firing a shot. Think about the psychology at play here. Hybrid warfare is not only physical, it's psychological. The goal is to make ordinary Europeans feel insecure, to question their leaders, and to lose trust in the institutions that are supposed to protect them. That GPS jamming attack wasn't just aimed at von der Leyen's plane, it was aimed at the collective consciousness of Europe. If the EU's top leader can be vulnerable in the sky, then maybe nobody is truly safe. But history offers lessons here. This is not the first time a great power has tried to destabilize its rivals without engaging in open battle. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union and the United States both waged shadow wars, spreading propaganda, funding proxy groups, and using psychological tactics to win influence. Even further back, empires have always sought to undermine their enemies by sowing division from within. The difference today is the technology. With tools like cyber attacks, GPS jamming, and online disinformation, the battlefield is everywhere, from the cockpit of a plane to the smartphone in your hand. So what can Europe do? The most obvious answer is unity. Von der Leyen and Pistorius may have had different tones in their public statements, but ultimately they and every European leader need to be on the same page. Because divided, they are weak. Together, they still have enormous power. And here's where things get interesting. Some European countries are rediscovering ancient strategies to deal with modern Russian aggression. Finland and Poland, for instance, are exploring ways to use their natural landscapes as defenses, reviving age-old tactics that once helped small nations fend off larger invaders. Think about that for a second. In an era of drones and precision missiles, some of the best defenses might actually be swamps, wetlands, and rivers, the same natural barriers that stopped tanks in past wars. The idea is simple but effective. If Russian armor tries to roll in, the land itself can swallow it whole. It's a reminder that in war, creativity often beats raw power. But the bigger challenge remains the hybrid war, the invisible campaign Russia is waging every day, and Europe is still far from ready. For example, take disinformation. Across the continent, Russian-funded media outlets and online networks are pumping out narratives designed to divide societies. Sometimes it's about immigration, sometimes about energy prices, sometimes about Ukraine. The details shift, but the goal is the same: to pit Europeans against each other so they are too busy fighting internal battles to stand up to Moscow. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Western mainstream media often helps this process, even if unintentionally. By downplaying incidents like the GPS jamming, by framing them as technical glitches instead of acts of aggression, they lull the public into complacency. They avoid calling this what it really is: a war fought on multiple fronts with no clear battle lines but very real consequences. So let's ask the tough question: what happens if Europe continues to underestimate this? What if leaders keep hesitating, worried about being called alarmist, while Russia keeps turning up the pressure? The answer is not pretty. Whole societies could find themselves fragmented, trust in democracy eroded, and the continent's ability to support Ukraine, its frontline defense, seriously undermined. But here's the other side of the story. Russia's hybrid war is dangerous, yes, but it also shows weakness. The fact that Moscow relies so heavily on these tactics suggests it knows it can't win a direct confrontation with NATO. It fears Europe's potential unity. That's why it tries so hard to prevent it. And this is where the responsibility falls on European citizens, not just leaders. People need to recognize when they are being manipulated. They need to see through the propaganda, question the convenient narratives, and demand stronger defenses against hybrid threats, because in the end, the best defense against psychological warfare is awareness. Let's return for a moment to that plane over the Baltic. Imagine sitting there, looking out the window, not knowing that your pilots have suddenly lost GPS. Imagine being Ursula von der Leyen, realizing that your safety, and by extension the credibility of the EU itself, can be compromised by an invisible hand pressing a button somewhere in Kaliningrad or St. Petersburg. That's the reality Europe faces, and it's a reality that demands more than cautious words. It demands a coordinated, determined response. So where does this leave us? With a continent at a crossroads. Europe can either continue treating hybrid attacks as nuisances, technical problems to be managed, or it can finally recognize them for what they are: acts of aggression designed to weaken and divide. The choice will determine not only the outcome of the war in Ukraine, but the future of the European project itself. Here's my conclusion. Hybrid warfare is not just about jamming signals or spreading lies. It's about shaping the future balance of power. If Europe fails to act, it risks becoming a battlefield where the weapons are confusion, mistrust, and division. But if it wakes up, if it unites, it still has the chance to turn the tide. Not only protecting itself, but showing the world that democracies can adapt and endure. What do you think? Is Europe finally ready to confront the reality of Russia's hybrid war? Or will hesitation and division give the Kremlin exactly what it wants? If you found this analysis thought-provoking, make sure to subscribe to the Military Show, share your thoughts in the comments, and join us next time as we continue exposing the hidden strategies shaping our world today.